You're listening to the Sketchnote Army Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook, and this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey everyone, it's Mike and I'm here with Renée Stevens. Renée, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
It's exciting because I think you work in a space that maybe many of us in the visualization space don't think about, but I think there's opportunity. There's been a few friends of mine who have explored the VR space, specifically doing spatial sketch notes before. And I'll put links in the show notes to that person, but I think there's an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about that because of your book and your work. And so before I keep on talking, tell us who you are and what you do, Renée.
Yes, no easy task apparently. I do many things. So I am, like you said, I'm Renée Stevens, but I'm a designer. Is probably the easiest way to explain what I do. But I am an augmented reality designer specifically, and also a motion designer. But at the same time, I'm also a professor, and so I teach. I love to create, design, and then share everything I learn with the next generation of visual communicators.
Well, you fit right into the Sketchnote community because that's what we're kind of all about, is learning and teaching. So that's really great. And so you're a professor, a designer. Like, you got a lot going on. There's something else that you have going on, and that is a book. Can you tell us a little bit about your book that you have coming out?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'll add author to that list, I guess, too. So I have just was released my second book, which is called Designing 3D Immersive Experiences. And the idea is really to provide a full process, like the entire circle of from concept all the way to completion of how, designers, visual communicators can, and even programmers can get started in the extended reality space. So I do a lot within augmented reality, but it also does talk about virtual reality, augmented reality, and that umbrella term, which kind of includes all of those things, is extended reality or XR. And so that's the kind of the basis of the book. Is I want people who are just getting into this area, maybe have a little bit of a design background or an understanding, but mostly just a curiosity of what they can do with XR, what's happening, how do they get involved, how do they start, and kind of bring them through the whole process. I had found that there was a lot of books that were focused on like the technology side of things and that kind of thing, but not so much, about the design and the visual component that needs to happen for mass adoption to be reached in the industry.
Well, I really want to ask where you came from, but I have a few more questions related to the book and the concept. And that is, can you, for us, maybe somebody who hasn't been as steeped in the space, explain from your perspective what is XR, what is VR, what is AR? Like, how are they? Obviously, XR sounds like the umbrella term, and then the two others fit underneath it. Can you just define them and tell us sort of how they're slightly different, just as a level set, so when we start talking about this stuff, people have an understanding?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's always a good place to start. And just to make sure, because the terms change daily. So you want to always make sure you're on top of industry terms too. So you are correct. Extended reality is this like umbrella term that, because there was so many different terms going on and people, they start to get the lines between them are blurring, with more technology being released and people pushing the boundaries on what could actually be done within, this space. So virtual reality is this idea of not being able to really see your physical space around you, but being transformed into a digital environment. So usually you see someone with, some kind of gear on their face, their eyes are covered, maybe they have two controllers in their hands, and that really brings you somewhere else, right? So you can't necessarily see the world around you, and you're being transported somewhere else. So I almost think of like VR is there, right? Somewhere else. The opposite of that, augmented reality, you can see your physical space, you maybe have a mobile device, right? Or you have a pair of smart glasses or something that allows you to physically see the world around you, but you have a layer of digital content that, depending on how smart your technology is, can be integrated into that space around you. So augmented reality is here in your space. Virtual
Hmm.
reality is there somewhere else. Um,
That's good. That helps me. That helps me kind of, as you were describing that, like that makes complete sense. Like the difference between there and here. And I see augmented reality, or I guess, yeah, is something I've seen. So, an example, I'm sort of working on my office, and I bought a new side table. But the challenge of the side table is there's a chair there, and it's a very narrow space. Now I could measure the space, and that got me narrowed down to side tables that I wanted. But I noticed on Amazon that they have this new AR thing, which is, hey, show it in my space for furniture. So I tried it. Now it was somewhat spotty, but I was able to like get the furniture I wanted, and I like literally like had my phone and like moved around, and I could see it like fitting in that space. And it like, I mean, it wasn't probably the thing that tipped me over the scale. There were a lot of things, but it certainly was a confidence. Like, okay, I guess I did my measurements right. It's going to look about right, and it was like another checkbox. So it wasn't like the whole experience, but it definitely was a part of it. And then my son has an Oculus, so we've done. He plays with it a little bit more than us, but we've done like I think there's like a Jedi training workshop that we did, and so I've experienced that a little bit, and it's pretty very different experiences. It's like the thing I'll say about the Oculus is when I got done with it and took it off, I kind of had to take a rest or something. Like my mind was really tired, my eyes were kind of freaked out, my body felt weird, like, and I had to take a little break. It was really interesting to observe that experience after coming out, where looking at the table in my phone didn't feel weird. It felt like, oh, it's just an added feature. So
Yeah, the
anyway.
whole user experience is an entire realm of, all the different things that people have to think about
Mm,
because it's a full sensory experience. And yeah, you become
mm-hmm,
fully immersed in whatever it is that you're doing. And there are some that, virtual reality is an amazing empathy building tool, and kind of putting people in places where they, or in experiences they may never have been able to do.
mm,
But with every positive, there's also that like dichotomy. You have to
mm-hmm,
also balance that with, okay, so now their brain's going to be working extra hard, their heart rate could be going up, and how long is this a good app, like how long should we be making some of these experiences, and what
mm,
kind of warning should we be providing. So there's a lot that goes into both the virtual reality space and then the augmented reality, and they
mm.
really are different. However, people do like to group them together, and there is some overlap, so I completely understand that, but they still do have their own advantages and challenges.
Mm.
I will call them at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see now why it makes sense that you would call it extended reality, because it's, or meta reality. I guess that's why, Facebook changed their name to Meta, and now they're, doing the metaverse, which I guess falls in the more, I guess more in the VR, but maybe they're both. I don't know. Do you have any
Yeah.
comments about that? From what you've seen, what does that look like to you?
I mean, the pandemic world we live in, I can't even say post pandemic because we don't even know what that is yet. But the idea of the ability to be in a physical and virtual space, and what does that mean and where are those boundaries, I think that probably more than ever has been something that could be explored. So
Mm,
having people like not being able to physically be together but still needing that personal connection, and the metaverse provides an opportunity for that. Of
mm,
course you can't physically give someone a hug, so there's still not those same
yeah.
things. So again, I think it's all about balance. I think there's a time and a place for it, and there's definitely the benefit of still clinging on to those in-person relationships that we also need. But when you can't have the best thing, what's the next best? And it
Mm.
does provide opportunity to really to go across time and space in a way that never was possible before. So I think there's a lot of doors opening because of it. And then there's also, again, those challenges, things you just have to watch out
Mm.
for just, that dichotomy, making sure that we're
Hmm.
mentally taking care of ourselves, we're not overstraining our eyes, those kinds of things,
Yeah.
to keep our mental health in check as well.
It's interesting. Probably the last thing I was going to mention is my reaction to a lot of this is kind of like, do we really need VR? Like, this is weird. It's sort of clunky. It's rudimentary. I worked for a Fortune 100 company, and someone did a thing for them, and they had like all the CEOs and the big wigs walking around this virtual space, but it was really clunky, and your body's half there, and it was kind of weird. So that I have one side of me is kind of like the practical side, or the whatever, is like, I don't know, is this for real? Like, this is kind of clunky. But at the same time, I remember, because I had a career pre-internet, and I was one of the advocates of internet early on. So I was building websites and chatting with people around the world and like doing all this edgy stuff. And at that time it was really clunky too, and websites were ugly and they're hard to build, and like, look at in the last 15, 20 years how much we've accelerated that. In some ways it's like not advanced, but in many ways it's become just part of life, right? Stories about people that travel now, they can't travel without a smartphone. There are no paper tickets, or there's all these requirements. So I started to try to walk that line of like, to be a little bit critical of it, but also to remember that it's in a really early stage, and we probably haven't seen even like it scratching the surface yet. Is that a fair way to kind of look at these technologies?
Yes, I would say everything you are saying is why I wrote the book that I did,
That's
because
great.
I completely agree with it. I think with new technology releases, usually it's the developers and the programmers and the
Mm,
technology makers that come to the forefront, and they don't bring the designers into the conversation soon
mm,
enough.
yeah.
So then mass adoption doesn't happen because people say, oh, this is clunky. This doesn't look good. This is not a good experience. And you only have, so many seconds into an experience for someone to
Yeah.
determine whether they're going to continue or not. And if you have a designer as part of that, they're going to be thinking about your, the full design, the user experience, the user journey, considerations for, the variety of needs of all different people. So
Hmm.
if you don't have a person with the expertise to assist in that area while you're doing these new releases, it's never people are gonna think the exact same thing you did.
Yeah.
And that's honestly what drove me to write the book as well. Is
Mm,
it's like, yes, you have to have design at the forefront with the programmers, developers, and the technology creators, and these, the people making all these huge strides, because otherwise there's no audience.
yeah.
So I'm a big advocate for that, for sure. But I would say that it's the companies that are using design, like having design first strategies, that are the ones that are definitely taking the forefront. You see
Mm,
that Apple hasn't released anything because they haven't made that perfect kind of happy medium between, they have the technology, you can see the technology being used, they have it in smartphones, they have it in buds, um, AirPods, they have it on the watch. They have all these little pieces that have all the ingredients to make it work. But until they can answer the question of why people need it and show
mm.
them that and how it's important in their daily life, they're going to withhold. So
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really interesting, and I'm glad that you took time to kind of lay the foundation, because I think as you discuss what you're up to and sort of how you got here, that will be helpful. So we've had a really good discussion about extended reality. Now let's go to Renee reality, RR. And so tell us a little bit. How did you end up in this space? Where did you begin? Were you always into this as a kid? Like, I mean, it doesn't exist for a while, so I mean, you couldn't have. But tell us your story.
yeah, so way back when, no, my story really began when when I was younger, and I realized, I knew I loved the idea of design, but it wasn't really, I didn't know that that's what it was called at the
Mm,
time. I just really liked creating messages for people, and like, I started off by just like making handmade cards for people, like greeting cards,
mm-hmm,
and I would come up with a message specifically for them. And then I was always into art and that kind of thing, so I would draw, and I would just be making all these custom cards. And people, my grandmother, my like family members, be like, you could do this for a living. And I was like, like, that's a thing. I didn't even know at the time. But in the back of my mind, I had always really wanted to be a teacher. So I guess I thought, well, I'm going to be a teacher, but then I realized, well, what am I going to teach? Right. So I have to, if that's something that I really want to do, I have to, also, I could probably do both. So something about my origin story would be that as when I was younger, I was diagnosed with multiple learning disabilities.
Mm.
And I think that actually made it teaching more interesting to me. However, telling people that I have multiple learning disabilities and I really want to teach, people kind of looked at me like I'm crazy. One of the biggest challenges I have is that I'm dyslexic. And so I think, I was told multiple times about, I can't even tell you all the names of my learning disabilities because I didn't really want to even own them. And, they became labels, and I didn't want people to say, oh, well, she's not capable of doing something because of this or that. So I didn't actually utilize any resources that were provided to me, which personally I think is unfortunate, but I didn't want like teachers or future employers to be like, oh, well, she's not capable because, she has this disability. So yeah, disability, like the term disability actually is like my least favorite word in the English dictionary, actually, because what it does is it kind of makes people feel like they're not able to do something by comparing their abilities to someone else. And that's actually not fair to that person. Right. So I'm like, well, what if we have it wrong? What if that person actually has like, I like to replace the term superpower with disability. It's like, I don't have a disability, I have a superpower. Right. So now think about how, if even the young minds of like people today, if they think, oh, I'm not different, I'm unique. Right. And just the terms around that makes a really big impact. So that kind of has driven me, I tried to come up with different ways to overcome my learning disabilities throughout my entire life. Like I said, I didn't really utilize other resources. So I started coming up with my own ways. And I think that's what drove me to design even more. And I've always been a sketchnoter, to be clear. Like for me, with different learning disabilities, like being able to draw things out visually and having like visual connections is so much more impactful than me just writing letters down on paper that mean nothing to my brain. So, that kind of idea of visuals and kind of connections between objects, numbers, whatever it is, are so much more impactful, just to the way I learn, to the way I teach, and just how I see the world, right? The thing about learning disabilities, interestingly, they're called learning disabilities, but they don't just impact the way you learn, right? They impact your entire life. So they don't end when you walk out of a classroom. And so I think the fact that, some of the wording around this is one of those things that I've kind of just taken under my belt and just kind of have utilized design as a way to kind of help overcome some of these challenges as well. So kind of fast forward through my career. So, I started off as a designer, loved that, all the things about design. And I started up, I wasn't sure how I'd get into teaching. I just kind of knew that was something I really wanted to do one day. So I worked at different advertising agencies, newspapers, different kind of places. I fell in love with kind of this design studio, kind of set up where I got to really be part of the entire design process. And so that actually kind of inspired me to create my own design studio. And when at the same time I decided to create my own design studio, I was offered my first teaching job. And it just kind of happened beautifully together. And I was able to step into the classroom teaching typography, and at the same time as I was doing my own studio work. And I was like, wow, I can do both. This is incredible. So that kind of became my goal, was like, how can I make this work? How can I be creating and then bringing that into the classroom? So throughout my career, I've worked in all different, for tons of different companies and, that kind of thing. But what got me super interested, the kind of two areas where I really got most excited about design was in motion design. And then, this idea of the user experience and, designing a user experience, the full flow and how that works. So I really see extended reality as like the advanced version of motion design. and UI UX, the user interface, the user experience design. It's really just taking that and going to the next level, the next reality, if you will. And so that's really how I got into it. Is I loved motion, I love the user experience, and I was looking for how can I take this further. And the way that I actually started creating in that space was I had this idea of how I could utilize augmented reality to help people overcome their learning disabilities. And one of the biggest challenges is when you're in a classroom and you're learning, people talk, maybe the professor, or even if you're at a talk or a conference or whatever, the person in the front of the room is speaking, right? But so you have an auditory input, but you may not always have a visual output at the same time. So if they have some kind of, that's where, taking notes and everything is really beneficial. However, if you can't understand, or you're having trouble kind of processing what they're saying because there is no visual, that cognitive load is really hard. So that kind of led me to this idea of, in augmented reality, if we could provide a visual to something that's only auditory, and vice versa, if we could provide an auditory option for something that's only visual. So let's say you're listening to something, you're in a classroom, you're an international student, and the class is being taught in English. But what if you could, in augmented reality, wearing glasses, you could get your own closed caption experience in the language of your choice, right? And all of a sudden, you could have your learning experience could be enhanced, right? So it was those kinds of concepts that kind of led me to create an augmented reality app called tagAR, which basically is an augmented name tag that provides a visual and an auditory option for that would replace anywhere you would typically wear your "hello, my name is" name tag, at a conference, networking event, that kind of thing. And even better, if you're wearing it's really kind of meant for those smart glasses where you would walk up to someone, get introduced to them, but then you could also, with a tap, get the correct pronunciation in your ear and using augmented audio. And you could go up and say the name correctly, something that's also very difficult for someone who's dyslexic. So that was actually created to help overcome those who are dyslexic. However, I didn't want it to be only for those who are dyslexic. I wanted people not to have to be able to identify with their challenge, but that they could benefit from the resources. So that's kind of a long origin story to kind of get to this point of the power of what I find in extended reality, whether it be virtual or augmented, is that you're not just designing one thing, right? If you print something, you have it on a piece of paper, it's a visual output, right? But with an immersive extended reality experience, you're activating all the different senses. And by having a multi-sensory experience, you are then increasing the accessibility and the inclusiveness of anything you're designing by not limiting it to one sense. You're basically opening up the potential to making it a little bit easier in personalizing it for all the different needs of all the different users. And it's really that got me most interested into extended reality.
It's interesting that you talked about the tagAR that you created and this idea that it shouldn't be only for people with dyslexia, but that because people with dyslexia maybe have a hard time reading a name tag and properly pronouncing that name, by having that support, that helps them. But anybody, I would love that. One of the questions I have for people who have maybe unusual names, and I'm kind of a stickler for trying to pronounce their name properly. So I always ask them to do it, but that might be kind of strange for someone, especially say you're introverted and you're dyslexic, right? So you're afraid to ask them, and that sort of stops you from saying anything. To be able to tap your glasses or whatever and get a pronunciation so that you have a pretty good shot. Now it benefits everyone. So it's like it benefits dyslexic people, but it's broader, and it becomes sort of this general benefit for anybody who needs it, which is a really cool idea. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And that's, obviously it's not, like I said, introverts, there's so many things that people need, and you may not even know that you might need it in certain situations. your need for having like a fully accessible experience could change based off of, a temporary something that's just temporary. Maybe you have an ear infection or something and you just can't hear as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could also be situational, like if there's a lot of background noise and you can't hear the person in the front of the room, all of a sudden the need for having that additional support and using a different sense automatically becomes useful. Obviously, it is of course great to also have, for those who might be deaf or hard of hearing, to then have a visual support, but knowing that the more options you provide, the more people you can assist.
Mm. In some ways, it's like a lot of times when we design technology or things, there's sort of the MVP idea, right? What's the minimum viable product, and you deliver just enough. It sounds like in this case, it's more like you deliver more than maybe is even needed, and then you sort of take the part that you need the most. So you're sort of covering all your bases in that sense, right? It's a full experience for yourself. So if you need, um, you know, a translation, you can add that on and it's there. But if I don't need it, like I'm fine with English, I just would never turn it on, right? But it's available to me. So that's also interesting, sort of thinking about all the different experiences and providing all of them, and then letting the user sort of choose the ones that they feel are helpful for them. It sounds like maybe something that
Yeah.
this extended reality could provide. And I mean, if you think about it, like I had friends when I worked at a company that were really into Pokemon Go. Um, I never got into it, but these guys were running it all the time. They would run at lunch and they would go search around and do whatever they did, pick up little characters or whatever. And as I walked with them sometimes to lunch, they'd, oh, I got to stop and there's some nest or something, and they would do something. I didn't even. I was so disinterested in it. I really didn't like know what they did, but it was really fascinating to me. It's almost like you think radio waves and TV waves are flying past us all the time, but we don't have reception in ourselves to pick it up. But if you have a TV set or a radio, you can hear that stuff. Same. It's sort of like the same with this augmented reality stuff, this Pokemon. That as we were walking around, like these characters are all around us, but I just don't have a receiver to see it, right? So it's kind of interesting, like this layer of a meta layer of information that if you want to see it, you can, but you don't have to, which is kind of interesting as well.
Yes. So I would say opportunity provides, more availability to, the individual needs for sure.
So I want to kind of take this in a practical direction. We sort of set the table. We heard where you come from, sort of why you ended up where you're at, and a description of these concepts. So my premise or thought around having you on was, I think there's a real opportunity for sketchnoters, specifically people who draw and visualize and think visually, to get involved in this space. As uninterested as I used to be in it, I'm becoming more interested in it, right? Like I could care less about Pokemon Go, but like I could clearly see when it helped me pick up my table over here that
Mm-hmm.
this is really interesting, and I don't think there's been a lot of surface scratched yet. So my question to you is, let's assume there's someone listening who's kind of curious now. They've been hearing about this stuff. They're not really sure what they think. What would you say to someone who maybe is a little bit curious? How would you get started in it? And what are some ways you think sketchnoters and visual thinkers specifically could be really good candidates for this kind of work? Like I know you make the argument for designers, and I guess that's sort of one variation of a visual thinker, but someone who can visualize ideas and maybe work with development teams. Do you think there's a space for some people like that?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I would just want to point out is that people are already using augmented reality. And sometimes people, if it's done really well, you may not even know it.
Mm.
So I just also like to have people start to just pay attention to their world around them and think about like, how am I using, like, if you think about it, you break it down to the simplest form, like, don't worry about tech. It doesn't have to be complicated for
Mm-hmm.
it to be useful, right? So if you break it down, it's really just specifically augmented reality. You just have a layer of digital information overlaid somehow into a physical view. So if you just break it down to that simplest form, like that brings me, like the first time I personally remember using augmented reality or like seeing it was when, back at like, I don't know, like late 90s, early 2000s, when they actually started using the the overlay for NFL broadcasts for the football games. Now you'll start to see that that's actually used across all different sports teams. They started it in 1998, but seeing the 1st and 10 lines on a football team,
Yes.
when you're a viewer at home, and just thinking about the benefit of that. Like if you are watching a football game and you have those 2 simple lines, instantly you become a much more active viewer, right? Okay, I know how far they have to get. You can even watch like children, they're like, oh, they're almost there. Like they have a visual, right? So that they get more engaged. So like that kind of information can it just becomes more emotional. It becomes more personal. And so it improves our overall experience. So if you take just that one concept, you can start to see like, how could having like additional information in context to my everyday life, how could that then make things easier? So if there's something that you do every single day, how could just like a little bit of a layer of information into your view, how could that help? You'll see in some car manufacturers, they have what's called the head-up display, where they actually, you can see your directions, you can see your, the speed limit, what speed you're going, all in your actual view on the road ahead of you. Super simple. It's just a projection of reflection. It's on your windshield. But just having that in context makes the world of difference. So the augmented reality is getting a lot of attention right now, but it's not necessarily new. And so just kind of remembering and starting to pay attention, like even like a simple projector, and actually any projector at all technically is augmented reality if you really break it down. How smart that gets kind of varies on the technology, but anytime you can literally have some kind of digital and physical overlay, you've got that. So you can start to think about how, if there's something that like is a challenge to you in whatever it is that you're doing throughout your life, your daily life especially, there's an opportunity for AR to improve it in some way. You saw it like in your, the shopping, that's a big one. You can actually measure in augmented reality. If you have a smartphone that has the Measure app, whether it's an Android or an iPhone, you can actually measure physically in, get the entire square area of a spot, all using your phone, and that kind of thing. So I think, there's so much potential, and there's things already happening, and then there's so much potential. And sometimes if you don't even know you're using AR, sometimes that means that they did a really good job with that user experience. It just feels so integrated, for example. There's a Warby Parker app that allows you to try on all their different, glasses, which, during a pandemic is a great, you don't want to have people putting things on and off their face. And so just really simply, those kinds of like lenses for different social media apps, that's technically all augmented reality too. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, but I got into I just want to make sure people understand that it doesn't have to be technical for it to be augmented reality. And also just to kind of reiterate that people are probably using augmented reality already without even necessarily knowing.
Yeah, I think it does answer, and I think it opens up ways to think about what it is, which I think is the first step. Like once you sort of change what it means, suddenly it opens your mind to like, oh, if that's what it means, then I could do this and I can do that. So in the case of a sketchnote or visual thinker, it could be someone's got PowerPoint in your presentation and you have access with your iPad Pro and pencil to go draw on top of it and connect the dots and show why things are important or emphasize things. That's augmented reality, right? Even a Miro board. So let's say you've got a team working in a Miro board and they're using sticky notes. If you say, for instance, we're able to go in with a tablet and a pencil and be able to draw and connect dots and do some of that work, that's a form of augmented reality as well. So that's pretty interesting when you make it more approachable and you put it in those terms. It sounds like some people maybe are already doing it and not even realizing that they're doing it. And once you realize it, then you could say, well, if that's what it is and that's helpful, then how can we amp it up a level? That's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. I think of there's an experience I was just thinking of that I hadn't thought about until you said that was, so I have an Apple Watch and an iPhone, and I have the access to the Fitness Plus. So what's interesting is these are all integrated, so I can have my phone up and do like an a workout, and my watch is connected to the phone. And what they do is they pull the data from the phone, and on top of the video that's playing of someone showing me their workout, my rings, my interaction, or my levels related to that workout are shown in the upper left corner, and it shows like what's my heartbeat, how am I doing relative to the field, like. So in a lot of ways, that's augmented reality, but I'm not really thinking about it, right? Because the reality is I'm doing an exercise, I'm being driven by this video, and my feedback loop is being presented as this little graphic in the corner. So that's pretty interesting. And it opens my mind to think like, man, what are ways that I could do that just in the things I'm already doing? And that's sort of where I wanted to get people to move to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of also just hit on something that is kind of the secret sauce of like what Apple is likely doing, which is they have all the pieces. So the biggest challenge right now for, an actual smart glass, which allows you to basically, instead of having to lift your phone or look at your watch, you would get that same information within your view of your glasses. It's basically the goal for that. Mm-hmm. And the biggest challenge of that is, of course, when you're putting something on your face, it's very sensitive. However, think about it, like if people have headphones in, right? Their AirPods are full of technology that they market in different mm-hmm. ways, but really what they're doing is trying to figure out how, that really cool feature, like you take an AirPod out and it stops, they're testing technology to see and have an understanding of where our head is and understanding, how our reactions of our body can actually, change that. So, that kind of connection to your phone, same thing, a huge component of the smart glasses, the processor is going to be the phone. That's not going to change, right? It's just going to become a new accessory. And so the things that are happening on your watch, you'd be just getting those in your glasses instead of having to watch the smartphone and the AirPods, you would just have the glasses and your phone, and you'd still be getting all that information. Perhaps you might still have to have it on your wrist to get all that, health information, but mm-hmm. you can see how they've gone into that health realm, a lot, fitness, health. But what they're doing is learning a lot about how to track the human body so that they can really have a better understanding of how to create these glasses. Right. So just really cool idea of all these little pieces, like they're really good at marketing them, but then you can also kind of take it and pin it from another standpoint of like, oh, but they're also doing this at the same time, which could lead towards this mm-hmm. next future invention that they're working on.
So it sounds to me like maybe the thing for us to do, as maybe not really realizing, is just to stop and look at the things that are going on around you and see, could that be augmented reality? And if so, is there a way that I can make it better with visualization? Now, in our case, maybe is there a way to sketchnote on top of something? Is there ways to do it, in that context? Or are there ways to take the visualization we're doing and then layer something on top of that makes it even more valuable? So maybe that's absolutely good enough, right? Just to get started.
Yeah. And baby steps. I think that's good. Like start off with something that's familiar. I think taking something that you kind of create in more of like an analog or, even hand done, and then bringing that into this digital space is actually kind of a great way in because, for instance, say visualizations, I think are a really huge benefit specifically of AR. So for instance, if you wanted to be creating a mural on the wall, for instance, you could actually see it all in augmented reality first, space out your size, proportions, kind of figuring out compositionally, making edits. And you've spent $0, right? Like you don't have to actually utilize any of your materials or anything. You're just using this digital option just to kind of visualize it using AR. I personally love, being able to see the color of the paint on the wall before you go and actually paint your entire room. That's AR. You could use it to visualize anything. I mean, I personally love, I actually use Photoshop to reorganize furniture in my rooms, which obviously AR has since replaced, or even to lay out gardening, right? I'm I want to know what this is going to look like in a year, right? And that's an AR app experience that I pitched a couple of years ago. It was let's do that. And now it exists. So that's really cool. You actually see your garden in augmented reality and then know where you should actually place, each of your plants. So from a visualization standpoint, it's huge. The benefit of it, I think, is timeliness, but also there's limited cost. So I think sometimes, like, if you want to try something, like as a designer, I'm so used to like hitting Command Z on my Mac. Like I'm just like, oh, I like that. Let me just see what that looks like. But then I, edit undo, right? And in the world, there's not an edit undo, especially if you're doing something. I wish if we could make that happen, we'd be we'd be millionaires, right? But what augmented reality allows you to do is kind of give you that edit undo option, right? Like you get to see it first in space, in the relationship of the other context of the things around it. And then you're like, oh, this doesn't work. You go back to the drawing board, make some edits, try that. Yeah. And honestly, the cost, with the technology today, my personal favorite way to do that would be with the Adobe Aero app. So it's free. You can download it. I think right now, the only limitation is that I don't know that they have it for Android, but hopefully that'll be coming very soon. But with an iPhone, as long as you have an image that you can get onto your phone, you can view it in augmented reality within minutes. Actually within seconds, probably. If you already have the app downloaded, it's really within seconds. And you could just say, oh, this is what it's going to look like in this space. Uses your camera on your phone. You select a surface and you select your image, and instantly you can visualize it in physical space. So you can do some quick edits. And, it's almost as good as your Command Z option before you have to physically go in and make all those changes. Yeah.
Something that struck me as an interesting AR feature of glasses. So you talked a little bit earlier about glasses for specifically sketchnoters and graphic recorders and facilitators. Could be this, like, let's say you could tie the glasses to a piece of paper or a notebook or a giant sheet of paper on the board in the case of a graphic recorder. And it would be physically tied to that size and on that substrate, like it's in a fixed position in the world related to your glasses. So you could actually go, like, maybe, let's say there was now an Apple Pencil that if you activated it, you could draw on that space. So you could go with a gray pen and like lay out the layout of where you think this talk is going to go, and like have lines there on the page or on this thing, and it would be tied to the physical thing. So if you moved it farther or closer, it would be tied to it. And then as you're doing the work, like you could draw it first and then tone it back to like 10% gray, and it would always be tied to that substrate. And then you could start doing your sketch note and have sort of this graphic behind that nobody can see. That would be really fascinating, where maybe you've got, or you could have the off on the side of it. Let's say you got the white space, you don't want to do the template. Or on the side of it, you could have the names of all the people in the event with the correct spelling in a picture, right? All around this space. So your back is turned to the panel, but you could be looking at the pictures like, what's that person's name? Oh, that's right. Their name is, it's Renee with an accent mark on the E, right? So you remember to put that in. It's like all this stuff is like around you. Nobody sees it, but it's only for you. And it's almost like you could bring in whatever elements you want, and then, what comes out of it is based on this reference. So it could be a really interesting reference tool. I don't know if that's a reality, but that sounds kind of cool.
if you can dream it, we can make it happen. Yeah. Especially these days. But I would say that you brought up something really, first of all, I'm excited you're getting it, which is awesome. And second of all, I think you also brought up something which is one of my other favorite things about this kind of augmented reality space, is that it breaks down of rectangles. So if we're so used to, like, we're confined by these rectangles, like our screens, I love sketchbooks, but like they are rectangles. Sometimes it's limited, like you run on a room, right? And I'm like, oh, I just wish I had a little more space. And, obviously you get creative, you tape, you do whatever. And there's absolutely some benefits to that. But also what's the benefit, I think, of that, of breaking out of that, is that you just can surround yourself with what you're creating. So if you're working on, you're visualizing the way things kind of flow together, or you're, kind of taking different parts. Sometimes it's like you can only see either one page at a time, or you can only see one screen at a time, or it's like you have all these windows that are overlapping. But within this space, you can really just, have things spread out and kind of have again, I think it's all about personalization and making it what people want versus kind of overwhelming them. But if you're in this like brain space of, coming up, like concepting, creating, you want to have like access to some of your notes, and then you're using that for inspiration, whatever, having that all around you actually keeps you a lot more focused than having all these windows that you have to keep moving, or opening and closing of books and other notebooks and everything else.
That, and I'll end on this. And this reminds me of a couple of years ago, I worked on a big project, and it had to do with research, and I was doing drawing and sketching. We were trying to tally information. The goal was to design a dashboard for these specific set of users. And in our office space, I think when they redesigned the space, they redesigned everything, and they ended up with an extra little chunk of space in the corner. They didn't know what to do with it, so they put 2 walls and a door, and it was like all whiteboards in there, like this tiny little narrow space. It wasn't huge, but there were whiteboards and pin boards and stuff. And I sort of claimed that space. And during this big project, I just started like spreading everything on all the wall surfaces. I wrote on the whiteboards. I had sticky notes up. I had like my drawings were hanging up. And what I loved about that space is I would go in there, shut the door, turn on some music, have a coffee or whatever, and just sort of I would tell people I would immerse myself in all the information. And I started making like these connections. I could look over here and get information, and then tally it up over here and have the drawings up here, and all the stuff was just at my fingertips. I wasn't looking through folders. I didn't look through screens. It was all right there. And I really loved that experience. And now that you talk about this, if I could have, a pair of glasses that would provide that on a blank wall, or even just floating around me, like I want to bring this piece or that piece, that could be really interesting for a creative individual who's trying to make sense of things. And that would be great for a sketchnoter, right? Like you could bring up, you're in a session, you could bring up again the speaker's information, their bio. Like you just talked about that. What is he? I got something about that. I'll bring it up and look it up. I mean, I'm kind of doing that sometimes with my phone now, right? Like I'll look up a picture of them to get the drawing of their picture, or I might look up their bio, and I've got it in a tab or something. But having it just like up and persistent would be really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think the one benefit to what you just said is like that room, that one of the downsides is there's a physical limitation. So like say you wanted to go there, especially in this pandemic world, like if it's closed, you can't go, maybe you don't work there, or it's like a 30-minute drive or whatever the case may be. There's that physical limitation, but augmented reality breaks that down. Like you can bring that room up anytime you put your glasses on, right? Yeah. So you can kind of create your own reality, your own spaces, and you can customize that for what works best for you.
That's pretty interesting. So I think we talked a lot about it. I'm kind of excited about just thinking about what it could be and starting to imagine like how could we as visual thinkers have an impact. I think there's definitely a place for us, and I think you're advocating for that, which is great. Let's shift a little bit. I want to change the discussion a little bit to pandemic. We're all, as you mentioned, we're still going through it. We don't know what post-pandemic is yet. What are some of the things that are helping you from going crazy when you got to stay at home and you can't do the things you want, and all the stuff we've been dealing with for the last 2+ years?
Well, I first started off by writing a book. That was how I started that up. I don't know if that was keeping me less crazy or more, but it was definitely fun, and it was great to just be able to kind of have a space where I could kind of just go into the things I'm really passionate about and focus on that, which is really great. So I wrote 2 books in 2 years, which I don't recommend by any means, but that's how I started off the pandemic. I'm not saying you should all go out and do that, but that finding something that like really does make you excited or passionate, or kind of helps you focus on something, I think is definitely a benefit. So the other thing I do is I have a lot of trim in my house, like around all the windows, and I've been painting that. You can see a little bit behind me if you're watching this on video, but I changed the color 2 times during this pandemic, and so I've just, whenever I need to just think, I just start randomly painting trim. So that's very low tech and doesn't require much mental capacity.
Well, it's interesting too, because the 2 things they're a little bit different, but they both require very extreme focus. Writing a book requires focus, but you can get in a flow state. And the same with I think like trim painting, because you're watching the edge, you're probably using a brush, right? And you're trying to like keep on hitting it and holding the right amount of paint, and like there's a whole technique to that. My dad is really good at that, but it's a very much like almost like a meditative state when you paint like that. So do you think that maybe that was at the root of it, was this ability to get into a flow state, a meditative state, to work on these two things?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely believe in like rhythms and
Mm.
finding rhythms to like kind of get into your creative space and to find inspiration. So, I would, if I would, I'm a mother, I have two kids. So I was, during this pandemic, I've also been doing homeschooling
Mm.
unexpectedly throughout, so, well, having a full-time job. So, and writing a book. And so, sometimes it's like, whenever I know I have like an hour that I could just write, I'm gonna, I have to know what I'm going to, I have to be ready to sit down and get like the thoughts
Mm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, during, painting or trim painting, that's when I was like processing and like, okay, these are the connections I'm trying to make. And like there's no screens. It's just like my brain, and, there's no, pressure, just kind of like thoughts can be free flowing. Like you
Mm.
said, there's definitely a flow. So I would kind of balance the painting with, then I'm like, oh, I just need to go and write now. Like, okay, I got it. So then I just sit down, and as soon as I knew I had like an hour to write, I would just utilize that full
Mm.
hour ready to go.
This episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast is brought to you by Concepts, an infinite canvas sketching app built for tablets with a stylus, like the iPad Pro, Microsoft Surface, and Samsung Galaxy Tab. Concepts' infinite canvas lets you spread out and sketch in any direction. Everything you draw in Concepts is a flexible vector, so you can move your notes around the canvas or change their color, tool, or size with a simple gesture. Search Concepts in your favorite app store for infinite, flexible sketching. Let's shift into tools. The way I typically do this for a sketchnoter is, what are the analog tools, pens, notebooks, paper, and then digital tools. Since you do some of that, but you're also in a different space, we'll open it up, and if there's other interesting software or something on the digital side that you can recommend, we're totally open to that. So start with analog and then go to digital. What are some of the tools that you like?
Awesome. Yeah. So analog, I mean, especially going into like 3D, I think paper prototypes are awesome. I actually, that just using an X-Acto blade and paper and a
Mm.
healing pad and just making 3D like little paper models, I think are really great, because then you can visualize something in a very fast, low tech, low pressure, right? And then you can kind of just start to see relationships, and you can start to see how we can interact with like a design that wraps around a 3D object before you physically go in and, um, ironically use a 2D space to create something that's 3D. So I think working 3D with your hands as much as possible, I'm all for, especially if you're creating some 3D content for extended reality. So yeah, paper prototypes, especially making them 3D. Sometimes, and what I suggest in my book is actually using like found objects like
Mm.
toothpicks and marshmallows or Play-Doh or whatever you have around to actually physically make these 3D objects, so that you can kind of
Mm.
learn about them before you, make them a little more technical, and bring them into augmented space or wherever they're going. So definitely that. My other favorite way to sketch is, for augmented reality specifically, is with transparent sketching. So I have accumulated all of the unwanted and forgotten old transparencies that people used to use teaching, and I have just stacks of them now. And I sketch transparently. So, I cut down the transparencies, like, and you can use anything that's clear. You can use windows, you can use doors, you can even cut like Ziploc bags. But you basically, you cut to the size of whatever you're creating for. So if you're just trying to do an AR experience for a mobile device, or whatever, you could cut it to that size of the screen. If you're trying to think big, you could just surround yourself with some transparencies, and sketch right there. I just use a Sharpie, sketch right on the transparencies. And I think the reason why I love that so much is that our ideas, they need to be born in the context to the environment.
Mm.
And having that transparent allows you to kind of get that AR experience in a very low tech analog way. So that's my favorite favorite analog tool, is just to sketch transparent, use the like an old, and the irony is like you're using such an old technology to create something so high tech, but it's all about idea on paper. The other reason I love that is because if you are creating something for augmented reality, you need to be able to have it work on a variety of different backgrounds. And so with the transparency, you can really easily check it. Like, okay, this is what it looks like during the day. This is what it looks like during the night. You know, it's when it's darker. This is what it looks like at a home. This is what it looks like outside. And, you know, all the different places where people might be experiencing whatever it is you're creating. So those are some analog tools. Some of the more digital tools, I mentioned Adobe Aero. I think that's a great opportunity because it allows you to, you know, with one app that you download, it's free. I love that too, you know, especially for just trying something. It allows you to test out what augmented reality can do. You can take your own image really simply, like you can take something you've created or something that you've drawn or something that you know, you're trying to visualize or work out, and within minutes you could have it in an AR environment. So I would definitely say Adobe Aero is a one that I would highly recommend. If you're going to be going into like the 3-dimensional space, then you really want to kind of explore ideas more in your X, Y, and Z axis, right? Like kind of, you know, dealing with depth as well. There's a great tool that actually I've heard a lot of students and a lot of people during the pandemic have been just self-teaching themselves, which is called Blender. And Blender is a free open source application. You can download it for Mac or PC, and it's a really great, really approachable way into the 3D space, whether you want to be doing creating or just kind of spatially visualizing, you know, how to lay things out.
That reminds me of there's an app that lots of sketchnoters use called Procreate on the iPad, which has just recently added a feature that you can do 3D to some degree. I don't know to what degree. Have you played with that app, and can you report back on what you can do that?
Yes. So I also love Procreate, use it all the time on my Apple Pencil as well. I've taught my 5 and 8-year-old how to use Procreate as well. So it's very good. It's great. It's like, it's easy to, I say that because it's like easy to understand and it's intuitive, which I love to. I haven't gone fully in depth on the 3D, but I do love the motion potential, like the motion options that it has. So I will happily check out some of the 3D options and report back, but I haven't used it for that. Mostly I just use it for some of my preliminary sketches, you know, kind of that kind of concepting idea, or if I do have to do some kind of illustration in my work. And I also use it for motion. So like showing sequence and, you know, the ability to record your screen and export as GIFs has definitely been a big tool in my toolbox.
I think what I've seen with it is it typically it's like you do a drawing and then you can wrap it around objects. So I think it's somewhat limited, but I haven't played with it yet. So if you haven't heard about this and you're a Procreate user, definitely go dig into their release notes and figure that out, because I think it might be useful. So let's.
Yeah, I'll be checking it out as soon as I get off this call.
So my last question is around your tips. So the way I like to frame this is, imagine there's someone watching or listening, they're into visualization, they're kind of curious about extended reality in this context. What would be 3 things you might recommend somebody do who's curious and like wants to cross over these 2 things as we've been talking about? Just 3 tips that they might to help them get started.
Sure. I guess my first tip would be try it. I think you can't really understand the full power or potential without experiencing it. So, you know, if there's an app that you know that has AR, specifically try it. Like if you have never used the Measure app, I think, that's built in. So that's a great starting point. Maybe just start paying attention to where AR might already exist in your life and just start, hey, that's AR. Renee was mentioning that. Like, I just think like observing it. And then again, testing it, like finding different experiences that use AR, and like if you have never viewed an object in your room, like Mike, you had mentioned earlier, try that and see what, and just pay attention to the experience, like what part of it is beneficial to you, what part isn't as beneficial to you, and kind of figuring that out. I think that would be my suggestion, is just start with something. Try it, because then you can really start to see and learn how it could be useful for your own your workflow and your own process. But I would also at the same time say, start with what you do know about that, and never be afraid to stop learning, because constantly this technology is evolving, and every day it's getting a little bit easier and a little bit more approachable. So I think that would be my first tip. My second tip, I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, but this idea of finding rhythms. I think routine is so much more reliable than inspiration. So I would say if there's something that you're, trying to do, like if you're trying to, kind of break out of the everyday mundane, something that's happening in your life, or this world of the pandemic we're living in, I think kind of building in a time to create, and kind of doing it at the same time each day it kind of builds this routine. And like I said, there's a rhythm to it. It kind of gets you into this flow. And that becomes so much more like your body almost like prepares for it. And that is so much more kind of like reliable than like just waiting for the inspiration to strike and then start creating something. Did you want to comment on that? Sorry, you look like you were ready to go.
Nope, I'm good.
No? Okay. All right. And then my third point, come up with 3. This idea of rectangles and just thinking out, like breaking outside of the rectangles. I think my suggestion to you is really to think outside, and there's no box required. Like just go outside, because I feel like there's so much unexpected things that can occur by being outside, versus being inside, that can really inspire you or can just really open your eyes to this world of breaking beyond the rectangles. So that would be my third point.
Those are all really great, and I think good general reminders to try things and explore them, and breaking out of the box and going outside, of course. So tell us, how can people find you and your books and your work and see what you're up to? What are good places to go? And we'll of course have these in the show notes too. So if you are listening or watching, look in the show notes and you'll have links to that as well.
So I have a website, ReneeStevens.design is my website. That's kind of my hub for all things that I do. So that would be a great spot. On social media, I'm on Instagram. That's probably my most active space. So my handle's at Renee_Stevens. And I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me, I'd be happy to do that. And my books, I link to those off of my website. My latest book is Designing 3D Immersive Experiences, and that's available through Pearson.
Great. Well, Renee, it's been so much fun to talk about something a little bit different for most of these, compared to most of these podcast interviews. We talk typically about visualization, and we sort of stick close, and I try to push the boundaries. So this has been a great Push the Boundaries episode. I'm so glad you could be on and maybe open our minds to thinking about augmented reality and virtual reality in a little bit different way. So thanks for putting all the effort into doing the books and sharing with us and being here today. It's been really great to be with you and hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
So for whoever's watching or listening, this is Mike Rohde for the Sketchnote Army Podcast, another episode. Look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Until next time, talk to you soon. The Sketchnote Army Podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohdesign Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of AMP Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon or go to peachpit.com and use the code RODIE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends, and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.